So the title of this presentation, The Dictatorship Economy, and these are not my words, are the words of Pope Francis. There are two books that I'm going to be referencing. One is Pope Francis and the other one was Benedict, just a profound theologian. I thought both of these were worthy of being my mentor. So with this one, I was invited to go to Alberta, which college was it, but to sort of take part in a bear pit session. So I was supposed to talk about prostitution and the exchanging of favors and defend it from a Catholic point of view, my arguments. So I dug into this quite heavily. And when it was over, I realized that nobody threw me out of the ring, so that was a good feeling. A dictatorship economy. What I would like to do is to approach everything that is said today by myself, that they'll stand on two pillars. One is, what is it that truly fills the heart? Because that's important all the way along. No matter which institution we're engaged in, no matter what activity we're involved in, what is it that fills the heart? And can we afford to engage ourselves in something that is beneath our dignity as human beings? And the other one is, are we ready to invest ourselves in a task, in an activity that we maybe truly don't understand? That it has a sense of rightness and a sense of direction, but we don't see the details of the plan along the way. But there's something mysterious going on. Are we ready to risk that? I'll begin with a story I taught at St. Michael's School in Weyburn, for I guess I was there about 26 years, 27 years. Before I took this job. And I went to Regina many times. I remember once going to Regina, and I saw a First Nations person on the streets. He was kind of stumbling around. And I was surprised by the first thought that jumped into my head. My first thought was, there is a brother whom I have not yet met, who I haven't met yet. So I couldn't meet him on that particular day, so I had to just kind of leave that. Hi, come on in. So that a number of years later, I became involved in social justice for the Archdiocese of Regina. I've been in this, now I'm starting my 19th year. Okay? And so it has been quite a journey. I got involved in different groups. One is Friends on the Outside, where the whole thing is about relationship. But I also got involved in the Marian Center, where you can actually go and visit and spoon out food, make whatever connections you can, but maybe be involved in washing dishes and the floors and that sort of thing. About a month ago, another thing kind of jumped into my mind that surprised me. I said, is this ever a privilege to be feeding Christ who is hidden in the poor? That was clear to me, just that clear. And Charlie's answer surprised me. He said, it's not off to Swift Current.
No, they canceled the other one. So I can't listen to you after all.
So Charlie's answer surprised me. He said, yes, he said, for those who see it. And then about 2 weeks later, Charlie asked if I would like to become involved in a more involved program at the Marian Center. So that kind of was weighing on my mind and my heart, to actually meet that brother in a more profound way, you know, because I see how they do at the Marian Center. It's all about relationship. It's not just spooning food, but it's about relationship. So I thought, okay, if Christ is hidden in the poor, then he's there to serve us as well. So we get back much more than we receive much more than we give. So that's in the making. I made my first trip to Marion Center in the morning with that in mind. So I said I'd commit to about 4 or 5 of these, and we'll see where that goes. In his book, in his exhortation, this is, Pope Francis, when considering those who are to be fed, he recalled for us the words of Jesus when his disciples saw the 5,000 that needed to be fed. And his words were, you give them bread to eat. You give them bread to eat. So then Pope Francis asks himself, so for us today, what does that mean to give bread to eat? And he mentions 3 things. And perhaps some of you are involved in all 3. A lot of us are involved in maybe 1. The first thing he said, to give bread to eat is first to remove the structural causes of poverty. The structural causes of poverty. Oh, I guess there's the machinery at work that creates haves and have-nots, is what he's referring to. So he said that that's one thing that if we are going to give bread, we have to tackle in some way. The second thing to give bread is he said that we must promote integral development. We must promote integral development. Now, Pope Benedict had an interesting definition of integral development. He said, development can be known by its completeness. If it doesn't involve the whole person, the body, soul, mind, social aspects, all of that. If it doesn't involve the whole person and doesn't involve everybody, it's not development. Even though we hear about developing the economy, developing this, and so on. But to look at it from that depth was important for him. Pope Francis also asks himself another question. What is the greatest danger on earth? He doesn't talk about poverty. He will later. He doesn't talk about war or environmental degradation. None of those 3 things. He said that the greatest danger on earth, welcome, the greatest danger on earth, he said, is anguish and desolation of the heart. Not any old anguish and desolation of the heart, but those that flow from a heart that is complacent, or a lazy heart, and covetous, or possessive heart, that is in pursuit of frivolous pleasure. All of this unchecked by a blunted conscience. So that's how deep he wants to go. But that's the most dangerous thing on earth because, according to our faith, God first creates us in his image and likeness, and then we create our world in our image and likeness. So if we have a wrecking bar going on inside, that is the kind of world we create. And those are the kind of institutions that we bring to birth, full of, or at least some tone of anguish and desolation. And these are not good places to live in. So the question is then, what can we do? If we're faced with our own anguish and desolation that come from frivolous pursuits of pleasure and so forth, and if we have created institutions like the economy and government and so forth in our own image and likeness, what can we do? And he says basically nothing, except cry out. And the pages of Scripture, he said, is filled with God's desire to offer us mercy. He will say, too, that the blood on the cross for the Christians, what that does is it removes every doubt that we might have of God's boundless love for us. That it's unconditional and boundless. And it's that love which ennobles us. So what he's saying then is that once we have received that mercy, which is guaranteed if we cry out, we are drawn into friendship with God. We have a new friendship, a new source. It's no longer the wrecking bar that's operating within, but it is going from the knot inside to out there in a way that gives of itself. And he says that the friendship of God puts us on a higher plane. What is the higher plane? He said it liberates us from narrowness of life. Like, who wants to get involved in a narrow life? And it liberates us from self-absorption. And what we can do then, he said, is we can hear the cry of our brothers and sisters. We can also hear the voice in our consciences. And we can also know that integral development only happens in the process of giving of ourselves. We realize that. So what he does is he puts his finger on the need that we have for God's friendship to change the whole picture. In Catholic social teachings, this is always the formula. Change first the person, change first the man, whether that man is she or a he. Change first the man, and then they go out and change, redesign the institutions that we live in. So if it's a wrecking bar at work, this comes out. If it's God's friendship, then all the institutions that we design will have that element and aspect to them. The poor person in that light should be able to walk into a bank, come out an hour later and say, was that ever a great place to go into? If we have designed it properly. You know? What I'd like to do now is briefly look at 3 institutions that are life together with others, friendship together with others, that we are involved in, that affect us. The first one is the economy. The second one is government, the state. And the third one is the church. And
sorry, can I just back you up a little? You
yes.
said to give bread was three
things.
parts, remove the structural causes of poverty, promote integral development, and
and I didn't give you the third one. I just remember now. The third one, he said, is increase solidarity by responding to the needs that appear before us daily. And when he says increase solidarity, that means you can't give out of guilt, or you can't give in a paternalistic way. Because those don't increase solidarity, that connectivity that we profoundly need. You know, for those 3 things. And we're usually used to, perhaps, the third one. We give. But perhaps it's out of guilt, you know. And if we get engaged that way, perhaps we're opening a door a little bit, and we can get into the heart and spirit of what Francis is talking about. So first, I said I'd like to address briefly the 3 institutions that affect our lives. Bishop Dan did a lot on the first one, and I'm going to draw this out of these 2 books here. Okay? Pope Francis said of our economy, "Thou shalt not kill," he said, to an economy of exclusion. "Thou shalt not kill," he says, to a dictatorship economy that has no truly human purpose. Because the purpose of the economy that we have right now is that money must make more money. And that's not a human purpose. How did we get to that? Why do we have a global economy that works that way? Well, Naomi Klein is one of my heroes. And you can also read a book by John Pilger who said, "I was an economic hitman." You Google him too. But basically those 2 people talk a little bit about how the global economy that we now operate in has come to be. The picture is that the economy that we're in was so rational and so right that it gradually just took over by common sense and then spread. And now it's worldwide. But John Pilger, take on him first, he said when he was a young man, brilliant fellow, when he was a young man, he was hired by a corporation that really operated under the CIA. And his job was to go to some country that had resources that some corporation wanted. But they had kind of a socialistic setup and they couldn't get in. So his job was to go to that country and talk with the dictator, or whoever was in charge, whatever you call him. They said his job was to have them take out a loan that they could not pay back. He said a lot of times they played ball, and this is what happened. But sometimes, and he always feared that they would not play ball. He said because if he couldn't succeed in having the dictator take out that loan, he said then the jackals came in. And the jackals were the hitmen. Rough them up. You know, fix the airplane so it crashes. Fund some troops that would counter what the government was. And then if that didn't work, then the job would be to find some bogus excuse to send in the army. And that's what happened, he said, in Iraq. Saddam Hussein wouldn't play ball. So what turned out to be a chase for Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan somehow jumped to Iraq, and they're going to rid the world out of this evil dictator who is pointing weapons of mass destruction at especially the United States. So that they go in and get them out there. What was all about oil? That's what it was about. You know, and how that was going to be handled and sold. So he will track down a number of different, and especially Latin American countries where that took place. And then if they took out a loan that they could not pay back, then what they would do is say, okay, you're not managing your economy properly now, so what we have to do is help you with your economy. And ultimately that meant a structural adjustment to their economy, and then ultimately the corporation came in to mine the stuff that they were after in the beginning. And Naomi Klein, now that's one of the ways this comes about. The other way, Naomi Klein wrote the book Disaster Capitalism. She just recently put out another one. And she developed it, or her thesis, well backed up, about how this globalized economy went from place to place to place. Chile, South Africa, was Poland, China, elements of that there. Basically it's this. If you want to pick somebody's pocket really easily, if they're in shock, like suppose you're in a car accident, and there's too much information coming in, you can't respond to what the needs of the moment are. Go and pick their pocket. She says this is what has been the style in country after country. Like for example in Chile, there was a war. So then quickly you feed in the Milton Friedman program and so forth. That's the second phase. And the third phase is if the populace rebels, then what you do is you go into torturing. You'll find out that that's what happened in Iraq. You know, in comes Bremner, I think it was, with 100 points, neoliberal points. And then when that wasn't taken, then you have the torturing that took place in, what is it, Guantanamo Bay? Have I said that right? But there is that third aspect. So she shows how the global economy that we're presently in is all about free markets. And it's all about money must make more money. And that's what Pope Francis is talking about. He's saying that it's a dictatorship that has no true human value to it. It's about something else. So he said no to a dictatorship economy and to an economy of exclusion. This economy has always played in the key of competition. And it's not competition light, but it's competition where the winner takes all, where the strong feast off of the weak. It's an economy which has absolute autonomy of the free market. And now by the free market you mean exchange of things of equivalent value. So if you need food and you have the money, you exchange and everybody's happy about that. Which is fine if you have the money or whatever it is that you need to pay for what it is that you need. But the problem is if you don't have enough money, then what do? I guess you go sell yourself on the street. Or I guess you get involved in the drug trade, that kind of thing. Benedict will say, but that downgrades us as human beings, because that's the relationship that is established by a free market system. How much is that? $3.40. Thank you very much. And then you leave. So there is no sort of human connectivity if everything is regulated that way, that it's an exchange of things of equivalence. And Benedict would go on to say that we have to do better than that, because we as human beings are greater than just operating at that level. I remember as a boy in my country, in my countryside, that if there was a farmer who you saw that they were in trouble out of the winter, somebody might devise a plan of let's butcher a pig. Let's ask Joe to come in and help butcher the pig. So Joe would come in and, oh, Joe, you know so much about this, and he would always walk away with far more meat than you would ever pay anybody. And during that butchering session, there was conversation, and I'm sure other needs and problems came up with which neighbors heard. Now this is the kind of economy that Benedict is pointing us to, where what you value is the relationship, not the amount of money you make. In this system, you devour anything that comes in the road of your profit. So if Joe is in hard times, you know that you can hire him for $1.20 an hour or something, you know. That's the way the economy would say it. But the heart would say, no, look at the family, you know, visit, all that kind of thing. And it changes the dynamics entirely. Benedict will say it's gratitude and gratuitousness, which means is overflowing generosity that must operate the way we live. And that's the only thing that's fitting for a human being. And to operate any less than that is to belittle ourselves. So if we just kind of gauge everything on exchange of things of equivalent value, we're in deep trouble as human beings. That's what he's saying. And then Bishop Dan talked about this, the trickle-down theory. You know, give money to the rich, they know how to make money, and it'll trickle down. Well, according to the trickle-down theory, and what you do is you talk about economic growth as encouraged by the free market and all that kind of stuff. Well, somebody said, this is the logic, that if the poor eat the crumbs off of the rich table, the way to give the poor more crumbs is to give the rich a bigger meal. Somebody else said, to make the birds happier, give the cows and horses a better grade of grain. That's maybe a better model. You know, because you go scrambling, you know, for what you are to eat, and you know where you're scrambling now. You know, that's the trickle-down theory. And Francis said, we're still waiting for that trickle-down theory to work. It hasn't worked yet. It's a system that makes up its own rules. There's a rule, I guess you've heard of the state, what is it called, the investment state regulation, where right now what is law, if you get involved in a free trade deal like this, like we have in China, is that if your government is such that they refuse you to come in and make money off of that those people, that you can sue that government for the amount of money you would have made had you been able to come in. I have an article here that you can pick up later, just as one example. Barlow in solidarity with El Salvador. So they belong to that kind of agreement. So they're refusing to allow a mining company to come in. So what they're doing is they're bringing this to the World Trade Organization, and they're suing them for something like $300 million or something like that, because they blocked the deal. So then what you have is you have probably 3 old men, rich men, going into a hotel room someplace, and they make a decision about whether who wins the case, whether it's El Salvador or whether the mining company wins. And so that's a rule, just made up. And we heard someone talking about the, I think it was, how many of you were at the balloon, the Earth balloon? She's talking about the seed. Pardon me? Yeah. Yeah, and they're trying to make it illegal for anybody to buy a grain that reproduces that you sow on your own. Yeah, make it illegal to use your own seed. So that's the rule. Where did that come from? You know, for thousands and thousands of years, the tradition has you use your own seed. But now you come up with a new rule, and you try and get a government to buy into it in whatever they will, and that's what you have. It's a system that basically enslaves through the accumulation of debt and interest to be paid back. So if you borrow and you can't pay it back, then the interest increases. So this was especially the case, I believe it was in the 80s, when oil money was abounding and they loaned huge amounts of money to different developing countries. And then suddenly the economic situation changes, and now they jack up the interest price, and now they can't pay back the monthly payments. So now they have to restructure their economy as a country, which means you privatize, which means that you cut taxes, which means that you cut social programs, you know, like education, hospital, all of those kinds of things. So it's called an economy, a globalization of indifference, which comes out of that sharing, you know, exchanging things of equivalent value, rather than valuing human beings. Pope Francis would say that the culture of prosperity deadens us. When you chase the dollar, the profits, that basically you kill yourself as a human being. Just quickly, to go to Benedict here, it's Caritas and Veritate. It came out in 2008 after the economic collapse, the global economic collapse. And he has a little section there, and I'd just like to repeat some of that. He said this. He says, in some quarters, it's recognized that we need a new model of development, not just economic development, but a new model of development and a new approach to the economy. He's not too hard. He's just saying people are recognizing that the secular world that we've built isn't working, basically what he said. And he says, you know, integral development, development in solidarity in the common good, requires a proper scale of goods and of values. It needs values. And he said that a wide number of choices of goods, as important as that must be, all of that must be, he said, employed against the horizon of an upright life, where you see the priority of the spiritual and that you see the priority of responding to the call to work for the common good. So he said all this stuff about the wide number of choices, offering them, must be employed against the idea of what kind of an effect that has on human beings. This moment in history, he said, is an opportune moment. That it serves as a time when we can create a new kind of economy. He said individuals can work on it, groups can work on it, and institutions can work on it. So he said, we must not lose hope. That we need to exercise our creativity and make these institutions ring with the sound that we as human beings want them to ring with. Not a wrecking ball operation at all. He says that the economic system that is in place right now is all about maximizing consumption and maximizing profit. And just to repeat myself, he says that's not worthy for us as human beings. That we are people who are created in the image and likeness of a God. We shouldn't stop there. A God who is triune, a God who is communion of love. So fundamentally, he's saying that if we don't take part in a communion of love, we can't in any way fulfill who it is that we're created to be. Anything else doesn't get us there. So in going to the kind of economy we need to create, he said that it must be such that fraternal bonds occur between the client, the co-workers, the customers, anybody involved in the economic process. In other words, you should be making friends by the way you do business, is what he's saying. And not just because you're giving them a better deal, but because somehow the heart is reading that person, and you're able to respond as a human being would respond to that need. Then he goes to the government. He said that the state must articulate industrial and agricultural policies that deepen democracies and enrich our constitutional foundations. Now, how many deals do we sign with other countries where the public knows nothing about it or what the implications are? There's no democracy involved in them. Somehow there's somebody who has an in with somebody else or some other ideal or goal at work, and people are left out of the picture. So he said, you know, the agricultural and industrial policies that are enacted by a government must actually deepen democracy and better our constitutional foundations. Then he goes on to the monetary stuff. He says that ethical structures for currency and financial and commercial markets must be created. Now, currency. You know how we create the money that we need to engage in commerce. Eh? You have to take on a loan with interest to pay back. In other words, there's a private corporation that's supposed to make money out of that activity. That's the way it works. There have been wars fought about that very question. There's been presidents who've been shot because of the kind of the way you're going to handle your currency. We wouldn't need that whole system of borrowing in order to and then pay back with interest. Now the thing about that is it's going to ensure the destruction of the earth, basically, to develop our currency that way. Because at any one moment, there's not enough money around for everybody to pay back the amount of money that they own, right? That they owe. So basically we compete with one another to get this stuff so we can pay off our loan and interest. That means somebody over here is short. And the only way you make money, or the way you make money, I guess, is to harvest the earth. So you have this competition going on. And it doesn't need to be that way. There are other ways. Bishop Dan talked about degrowth instead of economic growth, degrowth. What is sufficient? What is it that we need to be doing to live as human beings? So he said that that whole thing about the monetary world, the currency and the financial and commercial markets must be ethical. And they must be stabilized, he said. They must be coordinated and controlled so that the poor don't suffer. Right now, food prices, you think they have a strong link with the cost of production? No, they're a chip in the casino economy, the global casino economy. You can bid this stuff up and make money as it goes up. And then with your indicators, you know when it's going to fall. Now you can make money as it goes down. So up and down it goes. Somebody over here who's got the smarts and who has the amount of money is able to increase their amount of money that they have. So money must make more money. He says that's a great tragedy because the greatest danger or need that we have is that food is a right and it shouldn't be approached in that way. And finally he went on to food production and small-scale farming. He said, you know, that all levels of government have to act in solidarity so that those small farmers can make a sustainable living. Sustainable, and he said socially, economically, and environmentally. You are killing the environment by what you're doing. Now, just before I leave the topic of the economy, he says there are a number of things that really irk this system, that this system find irksome. One is ethics and morality, because that means you must treat people like people, right? He said that really irks the system. Something else is the dignity of the person, same idea, and the dignity of work. Another thing that irks them, labor unions, because you have a little bit of a power struggle then that you're in for as unions generally try to ensure the working conditions and the decency of the salaries that are coming in. And finally, what it really irks them, they find irksome, is a God of justice. Because you see, it's the free market system, that exchange of equivalent values with rules going whichever way you want them, is supposed to be God, that it has absolute autonomy. Because if you're worshiping another kind of God to the government, as seen, and I'll say by Catholic social teachings, which is mentioned here, it says a government, first of all, that system, that economic system, doesn't like governments to behave like I'm going to describe. The function of a government, they said, is to create a consensus with the whole people as both subject and author. That the consensus is for the whole people, and it is written by the whole people, if you like. What the hallmarks of that consensus must be, he said, is inclusion, response, and justice. Everybody gets included, everybody's able to respond, and then justice means that you give to each one their due by virtue of their being and by virtue of their doing. So if somebody is mean to somebody else, it's justice to give them back. Not when you see the person, both people, in the light of how God sees them. And then that's where restorative justice comes in that whole question. So that's back to the blood on the cross to sort of get us so that we can come to be all that we were designed to be. That's the mercy part. So a true government should be about building a consensus with the whole people as subject and author, and that the focus of their work is about the common good and is about integral development. What is the common good, and how can we develop the whole of the people? While upholding the principles of solidarity and subsidiarity. Now, let me talk a little bit about solidarity according to Pope Francis. He says 3 things about solidarity. What time do we finish here? Is it a quarter after? I think it's a quarter after. Okay. He said that solidarity to him is 3 things. One, it's a mindset. It's a mindset in which you place priority over community and the life of all, over the appropriation of goods by a few. And that's what the economic system is. It's an appropriation of goods by a few. But he said solidarity is a mindset in which you have a priority over the life of the community and the life of all. Number two, this is an important piece. He says that solidarity is a spontaneous reaction of those who recognize that property has a social value. In other words, it has a social function. And that the goods that are produced has a universal destination. In other words, the goods produced, in a sense, belong to everybody. But he said that private property can be justified if it means increase of production and if it means better protection of the integrity of the property. So if somebody can do that, increase production by having it, and increase the integrity or maintain the integrity of the property, yeah, then let's talk about private property. But the way this stuff can go, it can go wild, and you're entitled to your Monsanto. You're entitled to own the whole world, you know, all the food and so forth. All right. And then the third thing, I like this one, and it's never going to happen, I don't think. He said that it's a living decision. It's a living decision to give back to the poor what has been taken from them. And that gets us back into going into a country, booting the villagers off the land. Now they can go into the garbage dump and learn new professions like prostitution, drug dealing, and that sort of thing, because a deal has been made with the government. So they're saying, solidarity, you're not going to get those people back to be your friends and neighbors and so forth until you give them back what was theirs to begin with. So those three things about solidarity. What the present economic system wants is something called a corporatocracy, which means that they are the rulers. This thing called developing consensus and for the people and by the people and all that kind of thing, says no, that the corporations should rule, and the only function for government is build a police force and the military, to protect private property, right? To deregulate where it needs to be, to privatize, open up markets. That's what the government should be doing to assist corporations to do their thing. So that's a corporatocracy. And you see that that's where the whole thing comes into to head, isn't it? That's where the rubber hits the road. What kind of government are we going to do? And so then this becomes the key question about our elections, is do we have a government in place that uses its wiggle room, no matter which government is in place, isn't going to have full autonomy of what goes on in their country because they're subject to this global economic system. Because if you don't play ball, they can drive your currency down in a hurry. You know, they can break your back. But does the government in power wiggle for the people, or does it wiggle for the corporations? Is, I think, the key question of the day. Because there is some wiggle room. I like to tell this story about power of a person. There was a hospital in the United States that seemed to be doing all the right things, care of the patients and treatment of the employees and all that kind of thing. So the inspection board, National Inspection Board, whatever it was called, decided that they better check this out. What on earth, and why on earth is that hospital doing what it's supposed to be doing, and none of the other hospitals seem to be doing it? So the story came out that there was an immigrant worker who cleaned the washrooms, who came in, read the mission statement, and said to herself, they aren't doing that, so she tilted the mission statement. Somebody else came and tilted it back. Well, every day she would come and she'll tilt that statement. So finally, somebody got a little bit angry and said, well, who's tilting this mission statement? Well, they found out the story that she was doing, so they called her in front put her on the carpet. Why are you doing this? She said, because what is said there isn't happening here. So the board, to their credit, started examining that, and that's where the change started. So it started with this immigrant lady cleaning the washroom. How important was that, to have that sense to her? Okay, let me talk just a bit about the church, the third. So we talked about the economy, government, which is supposed to be working for the people, common good, integral development, and so forth. Now the church. And I like this. This is what I picked up that Francis said. He said, any church community that thinks it can go on without creative concern and cooperative effort for the poor, that they might find a life of dignity, risks breakdown, despite all their talk about social programs, despite all their criticisms of the government. And, he goes on, he says that they will easily fall into a spiritual materialism, camouflaged by religious practice, by unproductive meetings, and by empty talk.
What was the first one?
The first one was religious practice.
No, any church that does not.
That any church that does not, that thinks that it can go on without exercising creative concern and cooperative action on behalf of the poor, that they might find dignity, risks breakdown despite their talk. And then he goes on to say, I don't say that to anger anybody. I do this out of affection and out of love for the church so that we can break these unworthy chains of indifference, of individualism, and self-absorption. He said that this current system is unwilling to invest any time in assisting the slow, the weak, and the less talented. Those are Welsh, the slow, the weak, and the less talented, because they're so caught up in their own need for success, and they're so focused on themselves. But he said now the church, that's why the church must become a church of the poor and for the poor. Who are the poor? He lists about 8 or 9. This is his list, Francis said. The poor are the homeless, the indigenous, refugees, the elderly. He says the exploited, the trafficked, and the addicted. The church needs to have a program for addiction because this is a wrecking bar gone wild, you know. They need that program that'll help them get out of it, go from here to there. And he said the vulnerable, too, women in every culture, but especially in developing worlds, the unborn who have no voice, where life begins, and then he talked about the environment that is totally at the mercy of whatever people want to do to it. You know, that might rebel later on, like in climate change and things like that. How do we go about changing that system in 5 minutes? Well, basically, we don't. Francis says this: anybody who believes that the Spirit is with them, the Spirit is with them, he says, recognizes that the Spirit desires to penetrate every human situation and every social bond. Because the Spirit harmonizes diversity. That's the function of the Holy Spirit, to harmonize difference and diversity so it can become more. And often we fear diversity and difference. And so we go like this. Now the Spirit is to harmonize diversity and difference. And he says, the Spirit seeks to penetrate every situation, to unloosen the knots that we have tied ourselves into. And so the peacemakers are those people who are willing to cooperate with the Spirit. And so the question that we have before us, then, is are we willing to undertake a task that we don't fully understand where it's going? He calls hope, Christian hope, those who look towards the eschatological kingdom. What is that? Well, he says, in the end, what God wants, he says, life of society becoming a setting for fraternity, for justice, for peace, and dignity. And so people who act in hope always have that vision. And whatever wiggle room that they have, they use to try and bring out a world in their little space. And that's the thing that Benedict was big on. In their own space, you practice fraternity, you practice justice, you practice peace, and you practice dignity of everybody involved. I have 5 minutes still. I don't know, this doesn't look like a very professional drawing here, but it's my diagram of the economy that we are presently in. On the inside is what I said about the government. This is self-evident, to be read at 2 different levels. First, that is Jesus approaching each of us. And the only thing that I personally, I'll give you my witness here, that I personally found is bigger than the wrecking bar in my life, everybody has one, is to contemplate the cross, the message of the cross. What is that saying? And if you contemplate that, and if you get to the point that removes all doubt about God's boundless love, does that fill the heart? And if we go this way, that way, and the other way to try and fill our heart in other ways, we always find ourselves short. And so some people go to the environment, to nature, to be revived, and the Spirit was active in that, to the Word of God, or before the cross. Right? And so that's the key that Francis is saying. We have to start from within. And once in the friendship of God, we offer it to whomever we meet. And you don't know the power of that. You know? The smile, the hand, and you don't know the big picture. You just know that there is a friendship that brings about a light within, and that you offer that. And if the bigger plans come, by connecting with coalitions and so forth, then you go there. But ultimately, it isn't really about getting a majority and outvoting the bad guys. It's more about the inner transformation. And to repeat again, it's about first changing the individual, and then in that friendship, if it's a true friendship, then you have all the power. What's the saying that God and I are a majority? You know? Now, on the back page is David Corton's. I flagged that big in my write-up. But David Corton was on human development. The short of his story, he was an Anglican fellow who belonged to a family, big business. He was sent to university to learn the ways of business. Had one class he had to take to make up. Took it on human development. Went to Africa to, take the class. Then he thought, I don't want to do business. I want to help people so that they have the same kind of lifestyle we do in America. So he worked for 20 years, and then he came to the realization, he said, we're the problem. And that then became the start of his work. He's written a number of books. One is When Corporations Rule the World, a great book. From Empire to Earth Community is a great book. And what I did, and because I don't have time to go any further on this, is I outlined what he called the grand approach to transforming the world. And just very briefly, the first one is hasten the awakening of a spiritual consciousness. Through dialogue, through workshops and all of that, teach people, have them come to an understanding, because when they come in possession of a new way of thinking, everything changes. So he mentions a number of things. Cross-cultural experiences are good, hearing other people from other lands, and exposing the contradictions found in the culture that has been created and so forth. Then number 2, he said, resist empire's assault, he calls this economy empire, on children, families, communities, and nature. If they're going after these people, then stand. And he said, remember the ways of your heroes, Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, how they did it. Form and connect communities of congruence. Now this is where the Spirit comes in. The Spirit can act here. The Spirit can act way over there, and way over there, and so forth. But it's always the same, which is to harmonize diversity. Harmonize diversity, and so forth. And there is a grand plan of harmonizing diversity. The Spirit is in charge of the program. And that doesn't mean we are anti-intellectual. We use our intellect the best way we possibly can. That's part of it. I think that's the end of this. I have 2 handouts that you can take if you wish. The one is the Maud Barlow one. Where the WTO is going to allow the mining company to sue El Salvador because they don't want him to come in. And the other one is this stuff which you can maybe decide. I think that's it. So thank you so very, very much for coming.